innocent and poor. Poverty, death and destruction through HIV/AIDS, to name but a few, are the scourges that we have to fight against. Our humanity, dignity, and future preservation depend on us finding solutions for a new world based on economic, political, and social justice. Brothers and sisters, it is now my great honor and privilege to call upon our dear friend from the St. George's Cathedral, the Canon Precentor, the Reverend Chris Shivers, to deliver a message of peace.
Can I firstly say what a great honour and privilege it is for me to be here and for all of us to be here in what I regard as one of my spiritual homes. So it's really a homecoming. Towards the end of the film Gandhi, when many of the cities of India are being torn apart by interreligious violence and conflict, and the Mahatma is once again fasting to try and bring people to their senses, there's a moving scene in which a Muslim whose child has been murdered by a Hindu in the violence, in great distress and anger, confronts Gandhi with his grief. During the tense moments of dialogue as the film records them, the man demands of the Mahatma what he must do in response to his personal anguish. And as many of you will doubtless recall, Gandhi famously tells him that he must find a Hindu child who has been orphaned in the conflict and bring him up as his own child, but not as a Muslim, rather as a Hindu. We meet together today during a time of enormous conflict, uncertainty and suffering in our world. And as we do so, I've begun which have beset us, the very stumbling blocks to peace itself. As a Christian, I have to face head-on the sorry legacy of divisiveness which has far too frequently marred 2,000 years of my own faith community's witness across the globe. The part which Christians played in the enslavement of millions of Africans. The destruction, the total eradication of civilizations, of ways of life, which came through centuries of Christian colonization of this continent of Africa. The tens of thousands of Muslims who were killed by Christians in the Crusades. The millions of Jews who perished in the Shoah of the last century. A direct result of centuries of anti-Jewish attitudes, rhetoric and behaviour on the part of Christians. The millions of our fellow South Africans who for so long suffered under the yoke of an apartheid policy idiotically devised by men and women who proclaimed that they were doing the Christian God's work. It is indeed a tragic indictment on a faith whose originator proclaimed, "Blessed are the peacemakers," yet whose followers have all too often chosen to ignore his pathway of peace. And all of us have to face similar failures to live up to the great truths of peace, love and comradeship, which our traditions so deeply extol, but which we so lamentably fail to make real. Which is why the story of Gandhi's, with which I began, is such a challenge and ought to be such an inspiration to us. For when we look at the world we are a part of, when we think of the history we have created for our fellow human beings, we love. But I also know that our friendship needs considerably to be deepened if today is not to prove to be yet another false dawn in our long road to freedom and ultimate peace. And in this regard, the challenge of Gandhi's invitation to embrace otherness, to reach beyond our own comfort zones, and to achieve real mutual understanding should prompt us, I believe, to do three things. Firstly, we need to recognise that lasting peace in our world will only be realised when we have taken ourselves beyond acquaintanceship and achieved genuine friendship. It is wonderful that we meet in one another's sacred spaces. It is indeed a blessing from God that we recognize such spaces as holy and our religious beliefs as divinely inspired. But beyond such communal gestures and encounters, important though they undoubtedly are, we actually need to walk a harder road to glory. How many of us, for instance, have actually embraced otherness in our own homes, invited those of faiths different to the one we practice to sit and eat with us, to share our family lives, and thereby created for ourselves more measured, intimate opportunities for conversation, for discussion, and mutual understanding than such public occasions as this one allow? Will we, I wonder, risk such engagement and break down the invisible but tangible barriers which we so often erect to protect us from the vulnerability of real friendship, even as we are attempting at a safer level to be friends? Will we move into faith, into religious understanding from an institutional level, where it is often focused far too much around religious leaders, back where it belongs, where it's most needed and where ultimately it will make its most lasting contribution at the grassroots of our communities? For those who meet in one another's homes, who look one another in the face, and who share one another's food are much less likely to look at one another down the barrel of a gun, to resort to conflict and violence as a means of resolving the differences of opinion which of course exist between us, or to resort to the kind of negative slogan swapping and name calling which so often clogs up our communal discourse. Secondly, we need, I believe, strongly to resolve not to do apart what we can do together. In our struggle for liberation, justice and peace, we work together ceaselessly and creatively to bring down walls of oppression and wickedness. But in the new struggles to eradicate poverty and homelessness, violence and abuse, and to combat HIV/AIDS, too often we have retreated into our own familiar circles of influence, almost as if in terms of good works we were competing with each other, rather than pooling our considerable resources for the common good. We already have an interreligious commission on crime and violence, which has made strategic interventions in our community. How can we embrace this peace-building structure in a similarly interreligious way to combat the many other problems which beset us, and thus to put building blocks towards peace in our city, province and nation more firmly into place? Thirdly, we need at all costs to avoid the mistaken belief that the goal of our encounters and interactions is uniformity. For the disease of syncretism, the belief that we are all really talking the same language and singing from the same song sheet, is far too pervasive a disease amongst many who engage in interfaith work and cooperation. It does not bring peace. Ultimately, it will probably cause a greater degree of frustration and conflict. Certainly, it makes for bland, toothless friendship, since we don't believe the same things, and we mustn't pretend that we do, if our friendship is to be characterized by integrity and by truth. This much the Holy Quran makes absolutely clear. For whilst God could have created all of us as a unity, we were not created in this way. As the Holy Quran also goes on to reveal, there is a divine purpose to our having been created as a diversity of communities. For in so creating us, God wills to test us by and through our diversity. For the Holy Quran again recognizes, as does the Bible, that ultimate peace only in fact comes through a testing of hearts, which involves